Nice peaceful morning out here today. I think what I like about these woods is that this is what the world was like before people came along. Probably what it'll be like after they're gone. But I guess that's grim and unhappy, pessimistic. But I just got through reading a very interesting book called The Invisible Rainbow, which sounds maybe a movie with Judy Garland or something, but it's not. It's about the electrification of the world by mankind. And it's got the history of the process, the effects, and the last probably quarter of the book, fifth of the book, is documentation of all the studies. So when it comes to the effects of electromagnetic radiation on life, most of it gets ignored, swept under the rug. A lot of science basically stick their head in the sand about it. One good example is hive collapse with bees, and if you look into this, it's like, oh well, the culprit's supposed to be herbicides, pesticides, things like that. When the fact is about a beehive, bees are ultra sensitive to electromagnetic radiation, partly because of their size and partly because of their metabolism. And like us, they're electrical organisms. So what happens to a bee colony basically is if you put a smartphone underneath it, it disorients the bees. They can't navigate. It changes their bodily chemistry, and then the hive collapses. Also, you don't have to put a phone under it. You can have broadcast towers, cell phone towers, nearby, and it basically will have the same effect to one degree or another. So, but all this gets ignored because the telecommunications industry is the largest one on Earth right now. And towers are everywhere, 5G's everywhere, getting ready to throw up more satellites, low orbit satellites. But anyway, getting back to that, we're all electrical beings. The idea has been in science and biology that it's like we're all sort of like squishy bags of cells and things like that, and they don't really focus on the electrical aspect of it. But the way electricity works in the world is that the Earth has a charge. Basically, space, a square meter has a charge. It has a voltage. So the Earth has a charge. The ionosphere has a charge. That's why lightning goes back and forth. We're also electrical, and we are part of the system. So what'll happen with us is that the top of the head is at the positive pole. So with the Earth, the electromagnetic waves that come out of the poles and encircle the Earth, they come down to the surface of the Earth. They come into the top of the head, which is positive. They go out the feet, which is negative, which is partly why it's very healthy to not to wear shoes outside on the ground. But when the electricity comes in through the top of the head, it travels down the body in what's been, what you could call acupuncture meridians. And you can't get more unscientific than acupuncture meridians, but basically this has been proven also, it's backed up in the book, that they basically have hooked people up to meters to measure the charges, and yes, the electricity passes right through those. That's why with acupuncture, with the metal needles are inserted to redirect the electricity. So anyway, the history of electrification of the world began in England in 1888, and it was back then it was telegraph communication. So the entire city of London was covered in, I think, 850 miles of wire, so that people could send messages by Morse code telegraph. So what they found even in the beginning was that the telegraph operators became sick. They weren't sure what to call it back then, but there were myriad symptoms, all sorts of symptoms. Anxiety was one, but back then they were calling it neurasthenia. And you know, it's documented, recorded that it was making people sick. So people operating telegraphs and later telephone switchboards all reported similar physical problems. So anyway, 1888 was the beginning. And when that happened, there was a spike in illness. Now the next big spike came along in 1917, 1918, which was the beginning of World War I. So what America wanted to do was to stay in constant communication with the Navy and the Air Force and military forces. So they began putting up radio broadcast, radar stations everywhere that they could, England, Europe, all over the world. And in those days, they didn't understand the technology. The technology was young, so they were using very crude methods with very, very high voltages. And the waves were called spark gap broadcasting. And all they could send was Morse code. No audio, no speech, anything like that. So anyway, they put these up all over the place, and of course at the same time people reported all sorts of new health problems, all sorts. And you know, and it was being studied that this was having an effect. But also what happened in 1917, 1918, that's when there was a influenza pandemic. And so what you find throughout history is that when these increases in the electromagnetic radiation occurs, there's a pandemic that accompanies it. And it's not that there's not a virus involved. There can be viruses involved, but it's not being triggered so much by the virus. As a matter of fact, the influenza pandemic of 1918, they tried to study it and intentionally spread it from one person to another through saliva and putting saliva in the person's eyes and mouth and nose and things like that. They were unable to do it. They couldn't get it to transfer that way, which was strange, because on land it was spreading faster than anyone understood why or how. How could it be spreading so fast? And we see the same thing right now with COVID-19. And of course, to a lot of people, the craziest thing you could say is, oh, 5G towers causing COVID-19, it's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, it does sound a little bit crazy, but we've certainly got our head in the sand about the effects of electromagnetic radiation on health. Okay, so you might ask yourself, well, how does this process work? Why is it toxic, and how? And as I mentioned earlier, the living organisms are basically electrical. So electricity in the neurons, in the brain, in the nervous system, in each cell, in the mitochondria, It's everywhere. We're electrical beings. So to think that you can project electromagnetic radiation at a living being that's already electrical and it not to have any effect is just ridiculous. But that's where we are right now, deep into the ridiculous. So what happens in our culture when all these diseases go on the rise? When you look at something like diabetes, 100 years ago, it practically didn't exist. Hold on. Same thing with heart disease and all kinds of other ailments. The list just goes on and on and on. All these things erupted, recently, sort of out of nowhere. But they're doing a lot of cleaning here today. Hold on. So yeah, where was I? The increase in the illnesses. So how do the EMFs actually impact the body? Well, each cell has mitochondria, and the mitochondria are responsible for oxygen, creating oxygen, taking an electron, applying it to an oxygen molecule. And what happens? The electromagnetic radiation interferes with the actions of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria can't process sugars, oxygen, and other things in the blood, fats. So what happens is those things like sugars and fats just wind up getting put back in the blood system again, back in the bloodstream. And the fats don't know what to do. They can't get processed. They stick to the artery walls, and so on. So this is where the majority of diabetes and heart problems come from, because as I said, before the electrification of the world, these diseases were practically non-existent. So anyway, it all sounds terribly negative and pessimistic, and what the fuck are you gonna do about it? Because the stuff's everywhere now and there's nothing you can do about it. But the illnesses and the effects, I talked to someone the other day and they were saying, I might have mentioned this before, someone asked them what it was like growing up, before the internet. And they said, well, imagine a power outage. And I don't know if he realized exactly the depth and dimension of what he had said, but a power outage would take you back in time. So we're all being basically scrambled. Cell phones are a good example. You keep your cell phone in your pocket, your sperm count drops, you're more likely to have colon cancer, need hip replacement, all kinds of stuff like that. The thing about electricity is that if we could, the best thing for everything, for us, for the life on Earth, would be to do away with it. And but no, all the utopian ideas of what we're going to do in the future to thrive, it's like, oh, free energy, all this energy. And it's like the using the energy, flipping switches all day long. When you consider the consequences, the pluses, I don't think, outweigh them. So anyway, science mainly looks the other way, and if you go online and look up EMF radiation and things like that, all the tech sites, tell you, oh, it's fine. People that claim to be electrosensitive, they're not really, because when you blindfold them, they can't tell if they're receiving it or not. And of course, what else are they going to say? Because if they admit the truth of it, then what do? Admit that they're part of it, contributing to it, that they had their head in the sand, But we live in such a crazy time now with people tailoring their own realities to suit their comfort level. This stuff is certainly not comfortable at all. So anyway, there are all kinds of things that you can do to test your home. There are smart meters, things like that, or maybe that's the wrong word, but there are meters to measure EMFs in your home. Certain sources of highly toxic, what's called dirty electricity, can also be in your home. Sometimes the cause of those is dimmer switches, which I'm not sure how to explain how the circuit operates in that, but basically it breaks down. Anyway, to get back to the weird conspiracy crap, basically every major pandemic that we've had corresponds to an increase in EMFs, man-made EMFs. And in history before that, various pandemics that occurred happened to coincide with solar flare and sunspot activity, which again is a massive increase in EMF radiation. And speaking of the sun, one of these sites I saw the other day about how EMFs are safe and electromagnetic radiation is perfectly safe, blah, blah, blah. They said, well, if you get, exposed to EMFs, from your phone or something, it's like you get exposed to them by going outside and being in the sun. So they're harmless. There's no difference. You might as well be afraid of going out in the sun. And of course, that's very, very facile, flimsy argument, because the waves are different. Basically, there's a wave that's a sine wave, which is sinuous, and it's like a sine wave, an S-curved wave, actually can be beneficial. There were doctors in the beginning in 1750 up to about 1850 or later. They were called electricians, and they treated illnesses with certain electrical charges, which in a sense is a bit like what acupuncture does. Acupuncture, they can actually electrify the needles now and operate that way. But anyway, sine waves are one thing. What you have with digital technology is not sine waves, it's square tooth waves, which can be to living systems a bit like a saw blade. Sawtooth is actually another word for it. So something like a millimeter distance sawtooth wave. And then you take an organism like an insect, which is about a millimeter long. It just basically saws their nervous system to bits. So anyway, a good analogy, which is in the book, as to where we are right now, is that if you imagine a monkey who is found a jar full of peanuts, sticks his hand into the jar and grabs the peanuts and then can't pull the arm out of the jar because it won't let go of the peanuts. So that's where we are now with the cell phones. Highly dangerous, highly toxic. Cell phones, basically they're transmitting like, I think it's 400 times a minute, something like that. Oh, is anyone there? Check, good, stay connected all the time. And of course, it's big business. But there again, the brain tumors are going through the roof. All these illnesses are going through the roof. They're just increasing. And the medical industry is saying, oh, it's what you're eating, it's your lack of exercise, things like that. It's like, no, it's not. It's a corruption of the body's electrical systems by EMF radiation. And it's not a good place to be in. So, what the heck are we going to do about it? Like I said, the book's very good. I highly recommend it. In a way, I'm trying to help by talking about it, maybe spreading the word a little bit. It's occurred to me to do some other things, some graphics, some illustrations, Also in the book it mentions the well-known people that were the original inventors of radio broadcasting and light bulbs and things like that. Marconi was one with radio, so Marconi was involved with broadcasting between the United States and Britain. His station was on the Isle of Wight, and back then it was very large, very impractical, only broadcast telegraph signals, not voice or anything like that. So they built these, had one here and one over there, lived nearby it, and as soon as he started broadcasting, his health went down the toilet. He wound up having 9 heart attacks, finally died of one at age 63. His wife, when she came to live with him, she got sick too. She was pregnant, the child died after birth. And no one questions that, no one's talking about that. Marconi was one. Edison also, began getting involved with electricity at an early age. Also had myriad health issues of all kinds. Tesla, I don't know if he did or not. He may have, but these were people that were around it all the time. Electromagnetic fields, and I don't think it's just a coincidence that they had all those health problems. That they weren't eating right or exercising. So anyway, it might seem like an insurmountable, unsolvable problem. But when it comes to solutions to problems, as I talked about in one of these other videos, is that there are solutions everywhere. They're invisible until you begin to subtract. So with these health issues, which are worldwide, a good example of that is Bhutan, which was one of the last countries to be electrified, and we know what their health indicators were before and after. And basically, once the electricity lines went up, all those diseases began and climbed every year. So that after a few years, they had, I think, over 7,000 diabetes cases. Because, like I said, electricity is messing with the mitochondria. They can't process the fats and the sugars. They wind up going back into the blood. And but anyway, solutions. What can we do? Subtraction reveals invisible solutions, as they say. So in this case, you want a solution, you got to subtract the EMFs. So yeah, symptoms of people that are sensitive, it's like there's a lot of tinnitus, which is ringing of the ears, which no one's quite sure what's causing that. Maybe it's your lack of exercise and what you're eating, right? Well, in a lot of cases, I think what's happening is they're hearing the EMFs. It's like, how can you hear electricity? Well, it's a long history in the military of people being able to hear radar when they stand in front of the radar, right? It's like, what does that sound? Oh, it's a freaking radar, that's what it is. But anyway, the operations of the inner ear actually haven't been very well understood, apparently. And the sensory hairs that are in the inner ear are coated with a gelatinous substance, which also happens to contain metallic particles. So the gelatin actually slows the transmission of waves so that the hairs can sense them better. But there again, the particles, the metallic particles, also pick up EMFs, right? So it's not surprising that people can hear it. Also, a lot of other things about physiology that haven't been very well understood. Nerves are sheathed in what's called myelin, which science basically thinks is like insulation on a wire. Well, turns out the myelin sheath is actually the conductor. It is the conductor of electricity, and it contains zinc. book is packed with information. It's a lot to digest. I've only really scratched the surface, but in my humble opinion, it ain't no BS. Basically, the price we pay is being the monkey that's got the hand in the cookie jar. The question is it worth it? Is it worth it to have your, health compromised, possibly your brain scrambled? And that's something I haven't gone into, but the EMFs, I mean, you think it affects brain waves? It's like, yep, sure does. So over time, you might not realize or recognize that you're not as sharp as you were when you were 10 years old, or that you're somewhat cloudy, or you feel like you got tunnel vision, Can't focus that well. So that's symptomatic as well. So anyway, what can you do about all this? I was talking about subtraction. And one thing people might be able to do, well, you could always, tear down cell towers and get rid of your phone, things like that. But you'd also have a mass lawsuit against the telecommunications companies, which apparently I think there was something signed into law where they're immune from, prosecution about any of this stuff. But, they're the ostrich with the head in the sand, but it's not like it's not malevolent. It certainly is. So, the science is there. The facts are the facts. And they should be held accountable because, the truth be told, they've known. And they've known all the time. But money, money, money. So to them, the money is the peanut in the jar, the peanuts in the jar for the monkey. Here's something else that occurred to me about all this. And you can tell me if you recognize the same pattern. And that is, do you remember, did you ever work in a car wash? I did when I was a teenager. I can remember something that took forever was cleaning the bugs off the windshields, the bumpers, and the fronts of the cars. Especially if someone went on a long trip. Or on the highway, bugs splatting against the windshield all day long. It's like something that people haven't noticed. Where are the bugs on the windshields? Where'd they go? How long has it been since you saw a bug get splattered on your windshield? Well, there again, the reason for the decline of insects is they're hypersensitive to electromagnetic radiation. Can't navigate, can't reproduce, can't metabolize food. They don't have blood in the same sense that we do, but it turns into a mess. So why is that? I can remember when cars were covered with insects. You don't see that anymore. It's gone, and I think that should be a warning sign. Anyway, I guess I'll cut it short for now. Check out the book if you can. Okay, take it easy.